Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Commission for Planning Commission workshop for City of Sisters, Thursday, August 1st, 2024 at 4 p.m. I now call this meeting to order. Determination of a quorum. We have 5 commissioners present, so we do indeed have a quorum. And adoption of tonight's agenda. Do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving along, visitor communication. This is the time provided for individuals wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding issues not already on the agenda. And we don't have anybody here in our audience. Carol, do we have anyone on Zoom? Okay. I would invite either of those folks to speak on anything that is not already on the agenda tonight at this time.
I am going to do a roll call real quick. So the first person I see is Christian. I'm going to give you permission to talk if you would like to. If you don't have any testimony, please say so, or I'll just assume your silence is no testimony.
Kristen's muted right now.
Yeah, Kristen is muted right now.
I don't need to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to Morgan Greenwood. Would you like to provide any testimony or talk during visitor communications?
Thanks, Emmy. No comment from me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And moving along, we'll go ahead and get started with the workshop, and I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Seymour. Scott Woodford here. And the point of this workshop today is to get the Planning Commission a workshop and fill them in and get them up to speed on what we've been doing with the process so far with the Urban Growth Boundary Amendment. We have had a few meetings with the Urban Growth Boundary Steering Committee on the land needs report and the study area map. And the idea with this process is that the order of review of different bits of information and the process is that we run it through the steering committee first, get their comments, and then we'll run it through the Planning Commission, and then we'll also update the council. So it's been a while since we've had an opportunity to talk with you guys on this subject. I look back, it was June 6th was the last time. So we got a fair bit of information to get up to speed with you guys on. We have on the call today, Andrew Parrish, who's a project manager from MIG. And he's going to lead you through a presentation and try to help explain both those elements, the land needs report and the study area map. And then during the presentation, we would also are asking the Planning Commission. We had 2 Planning Commission representatives on the steering committee, Art Blumenkron and Rick Retzman. Art couldn't make it tonight, so Rick has agreed to kind of give you guys a little overview of his impressions of the process so far, and then later, when we get to the appropriate time, some of the feedback that we have started to receive from the committee on the actual study area map. So thank you, Rick, for doing that. We welcome questions, comments at any time during the presentation. We're going to hit you with a lot of information. We got an hour today, so we'll try to be brief or as brief as we can in our presentation while still getting the necessary information across. But we welcome your input, and also those folks who are attending on Zoom. If the chair, it's up to you if you want to take some public comment at the end. If we want to reserve a little bit of time, just let folks know. The couple of folks that are on have attended. One's a steering committee member, and the other one has attended the meetings as well, so they are up to speed. But welcome their opportunity to comment if they would like later, and if you want to grant that. So, Andrew, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you, Scott. Can folks hear me in the room?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. thank you. I just noticed I reused this title slide from the last steering committee meeting. Apologies for that. My name's Andrew Parrish. I work with MIG. Matt Hasty is the project manager for this effort. He's out on vacation. I'm actually calling in from Newport, so the video is making it from the coast all the way to Sisters, which I think is more impressive than, you know, from here to Shanghai or whatever. Apologies if there's any kind of hiccups with the internet, I guess is what I'm saying. So the UGB process, we are a couple of steps in a multi-step process. The first step is to identify the land need. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we've been in terms of identifying the land need. And then the second step is establishing and looking at the study area from which the future urban growth boundary amendment is going to be selected. And these have been the subject of 2 separate meetings with the steering committee so far. In terms of overall schedule, we are in the kind of early middle part of the process. We're in the looking at the study area piece currently. The previous step says finalize land needs. The land need actual number is going to change a little bit as we move through the process because of kind of characteristics of the land that will be expanded into anyway. So maybe finalize isn't the best word there, but looking ahead, we're going to spend the fall through early next year making kind of continuing this evaluation and looking at alternative options for an urban growth boundary expansion. We hope to settle on a preferred alternative early next year and go through adoption in the kind of summer months. So we're still early on in the process, and this is a great time to provide lots of input on the information we've found so far. In terms of the need that we are doing this work to accommodate, it's really based on the Portland State University Population Research Center numbers that show a forecasted increase in population for the City of Sisters generally, for Deschutes County as a whole, and especially the City of Sisters. We made this chart to show, you know, how Sisters compares with other communities in Deschutes County, and it, in terms of percentage, if we're starting at 0%, kind of on the far left of this chart, it is the largest percentage growth in the Deschutes County communities forecasted increase. And so we're trying to do this urban growth boundary expansion to meet housing as well as employment kind of needs based on this population projection. We've done an inventory of buildable lands, and we've actually done this a number of times going back to the comprehensive plan update. We've made updates to the buildable land inventory, both for residential land and for employment land. So we've delivered this information in some detail to the steering committee, to you all. We've presented it over the last couple of years as well. The moral of the story is there isn't a whole lot of residential land available, and what is there is being subdivided and developed currently. So future need is going to need to be accommodated outside of the existing urban growth boundary for the most part. If we look at the numbers of kind of capacity, we're basically showing a capacity for about 1,200 units based on a number of assumptions that's within the urban growth boundary currently. And so we compare this with the forecasted need, and we come up with an acreage determination. I'm just going to move over to the employment section here briefly. It's the same picture on the employment side. Here's the city's employment zones currently. There are some larger kind of parcels that might be suitable for future employment that are not currently developed. The maps that you see here are showing basically red outlines for properties that have seen some development activity, either subdivision or maybe full-on development in the last several months. I believe this is 2023 data that we're kind of adding kind of known developments to. Some of this land is in kind of a mixed use designation, which is that you could develop residential on it, or you could develop kind of a commercial use on it. But a lot of the city's employment zones, don't allow that. So we're trying to be deliberate about where we assume kind of a mixed use future and where might go to just kind of a light industrial versus a residential use. Excuse me. So overall, we have about 63 acres of vacant employment land in the city. And when we compare that to the forecasted need that's based on a population projection, we're looking at something on the order of 220 to 250 acres of basically gross acreage need among residential categories, and that's both low density residential and high density residential. That's employment land in industrial and commercial designations. We've also talked to the school district. So we've assumed about 15 acres for a new elementary school needed, likely as part of a urban growth boundary expansion, and then parks based on the city's standards for how much parkland per residence is required or should be achieved by the city. You might note that there is a surplus of high density residential land in the city based on basically the way that the forecasted need occurs. But the answer to that isn't to use that to meet kind of single family need, because high density residential land is basically a scarce resource in the city of Sisters. We have done the efficiency measures kind of process to actually increase the baseline for what you can build in the multifamily zone, so you can't subdivide that into kind of low density residential uses. So it's really in terms of residential, it's sort of this low density residential that is the big land need for the city currently, in addition to all the other things you see on the slide here. So I'll stop there, and maybe Scott can facilitate some questions, or folks who are on the steering committee can talk a little bit about whether I've got it right in terms of what you heard there and what their opinions might be.
So are there any questions on this? This is kind of forms the basis for everything we're doing here. So want to make sure that you guys understand it. You've seen this a few times before in various forms, so it's probably not new to you all. But are there any questions on the kind of the methodology, or why we have this much of a certain land use and not another, and kind of where we got to this point? Are there any questions on any of that?
I have a couple questions, and I apologize if they're out of order for another phase. I tried to keep that in mind as I was coming through these. And so is there any consideration currently of creating an urban reserve, or are we just going with the 20-year projections?
So good question. There has, that's a tool that we have available to us in the state of Oregon. There has been some discussion at various times about that, and just for those folks who don't know what Commissioner McDougall is referring to is you can have an urban growth boundary, which is your 20-year supply of land, and then you can have a boundary that's even larger than that. That could be your 20 to 40-year supply. So it kind of does a little bit of that future planning for the community, and those urban area reserves would be the first place that we would look to expand in when we need to do this again. So there's been no formal move to say we're going to add that to this process yet. Andrew, you can maybe speak to kind of how much more process that adds to the already existing process, and maybe you could give us a little bit of primer on what it takes to get one of those established.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it in great detail lately, but it is a separate process with its own kind of adoption requirements and findings. It has a lot of the same kind of material and analysis kind of as part of it. You have to look at the same sort of impacts on farm and forest land, et cetera. But it does make sense to do that work in some kind of sequential way so that you still have all this information. We're going to look at all these parcels out there. We're going to know something about them currently. If we can document that, and that can be relied on by the city, should you choose to do an urban reserves process after this, I think it would make sense for us to develop our materials with that in mind, but it is a separate process.
Thanks for that. I wasn't sure. I actually really didn't know anything about how that would go. So that's really helpful. The projected housing capacity, is that based on how we do our, how we have our density calculated today?
When you say projected capacity, are you talking about how many housing units we think we need to satisfy the projected population?
Well, I guess I'm looking at the projected density. I'm looking at table 2
Oh.
on page 9.
Right. So yeah, those use densities that are currently in the code.
And we've made some assumptions for, a proportion of the downtown commercial zone that will go to residential rather than employment uses. And they're fairly kind of middle of the road. We're not assuming that you're going to max out every development, right? So we tried to be judicious there.
Sure, and I'm not being I don't think negatively about it. I just am curious about how that was come to, and then also curious as to whether there is a place, and it looks like possibly, I mean, I see that step 7 is annexation and development. Is there something between the end of the UGB process and then the annexation and development where we can look at those densities and potentially have, I guess it would be new districts or that would be have different density, I guess.
So I'll try and answer out here, and Andrew, you can chime in as well. So one option that we've thrown out that to, I guess, the community is after the UGB process is complete, that we could take a look at doing what they call area plans.
Okay.
And that's kind of taking it to another level of detail. I try to use this analogy of the UGB, maybe the 50,000 foot level in terms of detail. We'll apply comprehensive plan designation, so we'll know general land uses. And but the area plans can take these little sub areas, depending, it might be just one area that we add into the UGB, or it might be different parts of, different geographical locations. So you could do multiple sub area plans. For instance, Redmond and Bend utilize this. Redmond has 3 or 4 different area plans. And so they take them one at a time and they focus in on those areas. And then they start to take a look at, where maybe the transportation corridors might be, where the land uses, a little more specificity to where the land uses are, where the parks might be kind of at a 30,000 foot level, how utilities are how we're going to service it with utilities. And so that takes it to another level of detail. And then we kind of stop there, and then we wait for a developer to want to come in and annex, and then we'll have them do a master plan that takes it down to the 15,000 foot level or 10,000 foot level, and so on and so forth.
Okay, that's helpful. So that comes it kind of as an in-between step.
It could. I think our budget with MIG is we might have enough to start one. I'm not sure, but it's something that I would definitely recommend to the community that we do, because it gives us a little bit of extra layer of detail, and it kind of sets out an expectation for the community to know what to expect in those areas and to have more input. So I think it's a valuable time well spent, and we would involve the property owners and the community through that process. It'd be a public process as well.
Okay, I have one more question, and this is, I think it's just something I missed along the way, and I want to make sure that this statement is true. In the residential needs analysis, did we assume the same vacancy rate when we were planning for growth? So we're assuming there would be a 20% vacancy rate in any new land brought in? Is that, okay, I just wanted to make
That-
sure I was understanding that.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily break down geographically like that. We assume that citywide, that proportion is going to remain the same, but there are reasons why new houses on new land might or might not meet that. It's sort of agnostic to that point.
Oh, sure, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood the assumption. Thank you. Okay, that's,
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's ready to move on to the next phase here, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. The next phase is making the study area, and there are specific regulations about what needs to be in a city's urban growth boundary study area. And they are, in summary, you need to include all land within half a mile of the current urban growth boundary. You need to include all exception land that comes into that half-mile buffer and extends out to 1 mile. So if there's something kind of in the vicinity of the urban growth boundary that is this exception land, which is non-farm, non-forest land, so something that's already, residential or commercial out there in the county, basically. And I'll show you some maps that describe that, and then you can exclude land if it is mainly full of very steep slopes, or there are a couple of other kind of allowed reasons to exclude land from this study area, and that just takes it off the table kind of in a very broad way rather than continuing with further analysis of that area. And we're not recommending any exclusions at this point, just because the study area isn't that big, and we can study the whole thing at this point. So here's a map that shows half mile from the existing urban growth boundary and a mile out. And the colors on the map are zoning designations from Deschutes County. So it's exclusive farm use land. It is Forest 1 and Forest 2. And then the yellow areas are the residential land that's out there in the county. And we look closely at the toll gate and crossroads subdivisions, and they are laid out, I think intentionally at some point, to be basically exactly half a mile from the urban growth boundaries. So those are not part of our preliminary study area. We don't need to examine those for inclusion in the City of Sisters currently. So this map shows you the contiguous exception land. So this is, it comes all the way to the current urban growth boundary, and then we look at everything contiguous to that all the way out to 1 mile from the urban growth boundary currently. There's a couple of other items that we talked about with the steering committee. There's a large school district owned parcel that is kind of in the northwest part of the city between Tollgate and the city urban growth boundary. That's got a conservation easement on it. That's the kind of thing that you could use to exclude it at this stage of the process, but we're gonna say it has no development capacity for a variety of reasons, later on in the process. So we don't need to do exclusions, I think, at this point. Also on this map are the constraints like floodplains, steep slopes around McKinney Butte, and also the airport kind of runway zones that you can't really develop in. Federal ownership is another big feature of land outside the urban growth boundary. So this map shows where there is federal ownership currently. The U.S. Forest Service has urbanized land in the City of Sisters. I don't know that they have plans to do so with anything else kind of in the vicinity, but we can have that conversation with representatives as we're able, and thinking about urban reserves, there might be some opportunity there, if we're talking about 50 years down the line. So that's kind of just my personal opinion. So this is some stats about the preliminary study area without any exclusions in it. It's overall, we're talking about 4,340 acres. the exception land, the land in yellow, that is the kind of first priority that the city needs to look at for meeting these urban needs. That's almost 2,000 acres, and we're looking at, you know, a need for 250 acres, roughly, for future City of Sisters kind of urban growth boundary and development. Just taking a look at the next step, there are 4 priorities of land that the state requires that the city move through. So if you can't meet your need in priority 1, then you can move to priority 2 and start looking at those lands. Priority 3, priority 4. And so the green land on this map is that priority 1 land. There's thousands of acres of that land. And we're trying to meet basically 250 acres of need. So it does seem like that's going to be where the city lands in large part, but there are a lot of I don't know, unknowns at this point. So we're moving kind of methodically through this process, bringing everybody along. So that's that's where we are. The third priority, which is kind of the next step down in City Sisters, that's resource land. That's not high quality farmland. So that's the forest land F1 and F2, and then high quality farmland. That's the lowest priority that you're allowed to go and look at. And then we had a discussion with the steering committee, you know, trying to break this area down into some sub areas, trying to just have a discussion about what's the land like down here. You know, is it a lot of smaller lots with individual homes on them? Is it large forest properties? And these kind of the beginnings of the report that we're going to develop and the analysis we're going to do, and then the findings that the city's going to need to have about land within the study area. So we identified 7 of them. We gave them sort of general names. And I think this is going to be the subject of a lot more kind of information. The city's going to hopefully start talking to some property owners, I think, in the area, in these areas. You know, we need to learn about what HOAs are there currently. We need to make some assumptions about how much of the land is actually developable. We're going to do kind of like we did a buildable lands inventory for the land inside the city. We're going to need to do that for land outside the city as well. What do we assume, you know, for expensive homes on large lots out there? Is it, you know, probably not going to be a total scrape of the land. Some amount of acreage and some amount of land is going to stay in these neighborhoods if they were to be brought into the urban growth boundary. And we're gonna work with you all to make those assumptions. So I'm gonna stop here, and we can I can respond to questions as needed.
So Andrew, I thought this might be a good spot to, if it makes sense, to have Commissioner Retzman give a little overview of the steering committee process, and maybe kind of talk a little bit about the feedback that we received on these sub areas. We went around and kind of went one by one through these 1 through 7 on the map there, and the committee gave feedback on what they thought were some of the conditions and viability of expansion in those areas. And Rick, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving a little overview of what your perspective as a steering committee member has been.
Right, thank you. First off, the steering committee, I'm pretty impressed how diversified it is. We have renters that's been here a short time. We have ranchers that have been here 900 years. That might be an exaggeration, but a great cross section of the population. So we're getting a lot of good input around that. And the staff and MIG has been just really leading us along quite nicely, as we know they do. So kudos to you guys. But back to this map here. So we didn't like section 1. I'll just go clockwise, starting with 1 there, because it's really highly forested. A lot of that is Forest Service lands, and it's heavily used for recreation. That's where the Peterson Ridge trails are, and a whole lot of people come from all over the place to ride bikes and utilize those trails. We didn't really like 2, again, forested lands, a lot of Forest Service. There's some tribal, not tribal lands, but tribal owned lands in that area there. Then the Reed Ranch area, again, was a timbered area, a lot of Forest Service ground that we you know, that it makes it a lot harder to try to bring that in. So we just kind of skipped over it. We talked about it, but skipped over it. West of Pine Street was kind of attractive because it's close to the school system. We're starting to butt up against toll gates, so one day we can suck them into the city. But there's a lot of timber, I think it was the low value timber area in there. That just makes it a little bit harder. Looking at the Camp Polk vicinity, section 5 up there, there's some large lots, and this is part of the not urban reserve, but what was that called?
Exception lands.
Exception lands, yes, which are, we really like to look at those to bring them in. 5, 6, and 7 are those exception lands. But 5 has large lots with a lot of expensive homes. And in our discussion, we thought that probably those homeowners aren't going to want to subdivide, and have a bunch of apartments in their backyard when they have a 10-acre lot with a multi-million-dollar home. A lot of the homes up there are in excess of $1 million. Now, down in the Barkley vicinity, there's some nice lands in there. It's part of this area. And so that's a very attractive area for us, with the exception of when you get too far to the east, you get into the riparian zone and some really steep grounds. That's that red hatch there coming off of McKinney Butte. And we liked Wild Horse, actually. I've never heard it called that before, but it was very attractive. But 6 was probably the most attractive. And between 6 and 7, we're going to be able to easily find that 250 acres or so that we need to bring in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That sub area 4, what's the issue with just the stuff directly north of the Mackenzie Meadows there, the 50 or so acres that I think is, I looked on other maps, is privately owned? Is it because it's F2 that's less?
Right. It just makes it harder to bring. Oh,
I think you're on the right track there.
it's forest, so it's harder to bring in. Although the people that own that are from the same people that own Mackenzie Village, right?
Mackenzie Meadows, I think.
Middles, yes. And so, they would like to see that brought in because they've already have the roads up there. And actually, I believe they have a little bit of development outside of city limits and outside the urban growth area into that area already. But because it's forested, it's more hassle to work through the zoning.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at there is that it's because it's not exception lands, it's forest zone land in the county, that it's priority number 3 land. And it would only be considered if we couldn't accommodate the 250 acres or so we need in exception lands. We could go to that one next.
And 5, 6, and 7 are
Zoning of it would be more difficult than, say, talking people with $1 million homes on 10-acre lots into subdividing. Sounds like.
Well, just the state rules say that we need to accommodate with the exception lands first. And if we determine that we couldn't exhaust or we couldn't find the land we needed there, then we could go to those priority 3 lands. And if we can't accommodate with the priority 3 lands, then go to priority 4. But as you noted on the map that that Andrew showed, we have 1,900 acres in those exception land areas, need 250 acres. I mean, we're not going to say that that's where the land's going to come from, but it sure appears that we might be able to satisfy it in that area first.
so 5, 6, and 7 are the priority 1.
Correct. Yeah. There is another aspect that you guys may be aware of that I wanted to share with you. As the state has been grappling with the housing crisis and trying to, provide opportunities to help alleviate that, they created a one-time UGB process that certain communities, if they meet certain criteria, could take advantage of. And I guess the question in my mind, and maybe Andrew, you can answer this, is if that would be independent of our process. So the criteria, there's just the general criteria around that process, the state process. Senate Bill 1537, I think is what it is that a property up to 50 acres could come through and not have to go through the full UGB amendment process if they met certain criteria. One of them was providing 30% of affordable housing is a criteria. So we haven't had anybody approach us since that bill got passed, but it's possible that somebody might in the future. We'll take public comment a little later. Yeah, if Chair, there had somebody raise their hand. If that's what you want to.
We'll get through our presentation and our briefing, and we'll see what the timing is looking like for public comment.
Okay.
Scott,
Yeah.
so that's something that a landowner / developer would initiate, that somebody that's contiguous to the city?
Correct.
Okay, and, okay.
Yeah.
And is that something that maybe in other cities, like if that's happening in other cities, is that something that perhaps the council in those cities has encouraged? You know what I mean? Or do you think it's just developers saying, I see an opportunity, I'm going to go see if I can make it happen?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, just curiosity.
I don't know how I'd answer that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think anybody has made use of this provision yet, but that'd be a good thing for us to look into.
Andrew, did you have any more on your presentation there, or were you kind of ready for questions?
Nope, I don't have anything else.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. I can go back to any maps or what should facilitate a discussion if you need.
So we want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to ask questions here on the process so far, or next steps. Or have you guys heard this enough that you kind of know it already?
So I'm curious. I mean, some of the assumptions that I'm seeing is that the primary area that looks the best is that area in yellow that's towards the north. But that's where there are an awful lot of homes that are huge on 2 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres. And just common sense for me is if I owned out there and I had a house, I would not want to be brought into the urban growth boundary and be annexed into the city. I wouldn't have any wish to do that because I don't want to have people on my land. If I was going to sell it, maybe that's a different thing. The other assumption is, my assumption would be that a city would want to have its single-family detached homes closer to the school district buildings and not another mile away. If they could annex land or bring in land into the urban growth boundary that would accommodate more housing around the schools, and the schools are now moved all into the same campus area. So I don't know, are those two assumptions that you take into consideration, that we should build closer to schools with single family housing and multifamily, and that we probably don't want to consider big houses on big pieces of property to put them into the urban growth boundary, and because they're probably not going to want to be annexed in? I mean, if you see what I'm trying to get, because I could say, no, you ask me, I own 25 acres out there and I have a big $2 million house on it, and city comes to me and says, are you interested in coming in? I would say no, but if I sell the land, if I wanted to sell the land, I might say yes. That becomes a strange kind of a money greed kind of thing in my mind. The other thing, the assumption I've got is that we would not want to be building more homes near the airport in the flyway. It would seem to me that would be kind of there'd be a big X through that. The other thing that I'm curious about is that on these maps, and it talks about land outside city urban growth boundary, it really doesn't make mention as opposed except for this little dashed line around 250 acres, and I'm assuming that's the Lazy Z Ranch, which is city-owned but not within the urban growth boundary?
That 250 acres is just a visual aid showing about the size of what it is that the city's looking for. So
Oh, that-
it's not meant to be on top of any particular
that-
location.
Not
Sorry
to
about that.
provide scale for
Okay.
how big 250 acres would,
So then my question to staff is, why doesn't that Lazy Z city-owned land, why isn't it shown in any of this?
so maybe could that's a map up? Andrew, can you put the map back up?
Yeah, we'll do.
But I'll take a crack at some of the questions, and Andrew, I'm sure you got some thoughts too. So it does make sense to locate new homes near schools. I'll agree with that. But one of the, I guess, larger factors that we have to take into consideration is this prioritization of lands. If the prioritization of lands are on one side of the city and the schools on the other, we still have to kind of utilize the prioritization first. But in some of the comments that, we had, the steering committee kind of, several members kind of latched onto that, and they thought certain areas made more sense because they were still walkable, at least to the downtown area. And some of those, like as Rick had mentioned, on the west side would be closer to the schools. It just so happens that those are lower priority lands, that the way the state sets out the
And
system.
does the state let you make exceptions? I mean, I know they're low priority lands, but our schools are here and we would like to build around them. Do they-
Question. Good question for Andrew. Like if the city said, hey, we really want these lands to be closer to our schools for walkability and all that, can we somehow override the prioritization?
So I think we're gonna wind up, further rating a lot of this land in the north and northeast part of the city as, very good. There are, no subdivision that has prohibitions on infill, et cetera, and maybe less good for inclusion land out there. And so there, it might be the case that we can say, absolutely not to some category of land in the what's called exception land currently, because it has an exception to the statewide planning laws about farm and forest land. So it might be the case that we can get to that point of saying, we don't have the acreage we need in this, very good land out here. And distance to schools will certainly be a factor that we can, measure and rate and write findings about. And we can even rate it very strongly in coordination with other factors that the state requires us to sort of evaluate. So it's kind of our job, as consultants and staff's job to bring you the way to the way that you need to make this decision, and then what you can use and what you can't use. And so that's part of this whole process. So that is land that can be looked at if we say that we don't have enough land in the yellow, basically. But that is kind of where urban reserve discussions have a little bit more leeway, because that might be a reason why you can eventually get a rezone of some of this forest land to a residential category, or say that it's in this urban reserve area because we've looked at it and we know that it makes for good urban land in the future. But it is a little bit harder as part of this process to get there.
Clear? That's
Clearer.
I think it's possible, I guess. It may be possible.
Yes, I would. I
Yes,
guess.
that was a great consultant answer.
And then, Andrew, if you would kind of touch a little bit on, the idea, the concept of how developable is these 3 to 5 acre lots, north of the existing boundary. You'd mentioned that we would be doing a buildable lands inventory up there to kind of, do further analysis on the feasibility of its development at urban levels in the future. You want to expand
Right.
a little bit?
Yeah. So we we do a buildable land inventory that makes some assumptions about how much acreage around an existing home is expected to remain, because you do see in cases like this, you know, somebody will come and say, I want to do a big subdivision and buy up some properties and do that. And maybe, you know, maybe it's based on the improvement value of the home. So we can say homes over $1 million get 5 acres. So homes under $1 million get half an acre, you know, something like that. Just to get a ballpark kind of figure of like how many acres are we really talking about if we were to expand the urban growth boundary to include this subdivision. You know, maybe they're 2 to 5 acres right now. Maybe half of that is developable. That becomes a criteria that we can use to say that you're not getting a lot of bang for your buck if you annex this area, or these are all on septic already, and it would cost the city a lot of money to run sewer out there. There are properties in this area that, at least anecdotally, have sewer, you know, abutting because development is anticipated. So we do have both situations out here. And I, you know, next steps are going to provide a lot more kind of detail about what this land looks like. We're kind of just doing our due diligence of saying, you know, we're really taking this stuff sort of off the table just to start with, and we can dive into what some of these subdivisions look like. The transportation system is another you know, big issue. Are these roads that have sufficient setbacks to eventually be kind of more urban roads, or are they really like hard and costly to do that too? So that can be another way that we give ratings to subsets of these areas. And I mentioned HOAs. You know, there are CCNRs that can be really prohibitive, and you know, unless the city wants to go to bat and make an appellate court like look at these things and decide whether to enforce them. So that can be a factor as well, and that would require a little bit of, I think, legwork on the city's part to reach out to these property owners. And you know, from my perspective, I don't know the attitudes toward development for folks out here, but as we get more feedback, as we get your input, we will start to fill in the map a little bit.
And the steering committee really kind of honed in on this issue at the last meeting. You know, looking at the size of the lots that you have kind of north of the existing boundary, and you know, the factoring in some of these nice homes and the cost that it would take to assemble enough of these lots to, I mean, you can just use a little perspective. You can see the Clear Pine neighborhood, you know, down below. If you were to do the equivalent of that, you'd probably have to buy up 10 different lots. That means negotiating with 10 different property owners trying to assemble it. Not an easy thing to do, to pull off, to assemble enough land to make it developable. So they started looking at the lot sizes, you know, that are just north of Saddlestone, kind of east of Locust, and seeing the size of those parcels and the amount of development that they have on there now. And they were honing in on the fact that those would be much more developable. So those are the kind of factors that we're gonna take into consideration as we pick the next step. So, and then the airport buffer, I think we would just kind of apply the same kind of restrictions that we do now to future areas. Kind of make sure they're not in a runway protection zone. And then as you radiate out, there's kind of varying and less restrictions on developability. We did get a letter from somebody up there that says we need to make sure we consider the needs of the airport and allow them to expand as the community expands. So that's something we want to take into, his opinion, wanted us to take into consideration as we grew.
One of the things they wanted us to consider was available hangar space, you know, for that live work type thing, you know, because a lot of people out by the airport have houses with their garages, their hangar. And in his letter, he was talking about he would like to expand that around the airport more.
Does the city limits go around the airport runway? Or is that out of the city limits? Is the runway?
That's outside the city limits,
The
right?
airport, I think, the runway, I think, is all in the city limits.
Yeah.
It's just that little hatched area is more of the runway protection zone. Goes beyond. the runway. Any other questions? And I don't know, maybe,
Yeah, I got another. Can you explain to me a little bit more definition on what the school district's conservation easement land is? What is that? Is it untouchable? Is it education based?
I believe a good chunk of that is owned by the Shoots Land Trust. And they buy lands up so they can conserve them. And like out by, down in the Metolius, not the Metolius, but the White's Creek Canyon, there's a preserve down there. Out towards Black Butte, they have some preserved lands. And that's what it is because they're sensitive plant species in there and they wanted to make sure they kept.
So that chunk of land is owned by the school district, but it was purchased by the land trust and given to them.
I
and
believe part of it's, yeah.
Which is fine. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a great idea. It makes complete sense to keep a forest for education. Oh, Scott, and the other thing is why isn't Lazy Z city-owned property included in any of our maps?
so I think it was in the half mile consideration. If you go back to that, Andrew. So you can see on that half mile, it is a portion of it's located in the half mile. And I think a portion of it's in the 1 mile, but so it was under consideration. It's in the study area, but it was that second map that we went to where it starts to take out, well, is it in the second map, Andrew? Must be priority 4 lands, I would think. Yeah, it's a portion of it is, you can see the EFU zone land just to the west of the treatment plant.
Yes?
So, and then other properties north of Highway 20. So, because it's in a half mile area, the portion that's in the half mile area,
So
and then a portion of it's F1 as well.
So that piece of piece of property that says EFUCSC, just to the right of the treatment plant,
Yeah,
that's the Lazy Z Ranch?
well, it's a portion of the Lazy Z. It also includes 2 parcels a little closer to the city boundary. It looks like there's just maybe a portion of, that, I wish I could have a pointer, a laser pointer, but it looks like not all of it's in there, but a portion of the Lazy Z, because it's a big parcel of land.
I mean, it's city owned.
Yeah, it is city owned.
I'm just surprised that it's never delineated as this is a chunk of city land.
For what purpose? I mean, we don't.
So people could tell that it was a chunk of city land.
Oh.
Yeah, we can add that to the maps, for sure. And it's rated low because of its zoning, basically.
There was some talk too about, to see the F1 right above the kind of the treatment plant area, the headquarters, Public Works headquarters, and then there's that little square, that's the fire department's little training facility. There was some discussion at the steering committee, why wouldn't we bring, it's all city owned, that whole kind of, that larger square that has those uses plus the yellow forested area, that kind of larger square is all city owned, and the question was whether we would bring that in as well. But I was talking with Bob Britannia, and he doesn't see a need for that to there's no benefit to the city to bring that in. He likes it to have the buffer between the residential and the treatment facility. And plus it's a lower priority land too, so.
Be a nice park.
It's smelly park, but yeah.
No, it is
Less.
So. Any other questions from the commission? And we might be able to reserve some time for some public comment if Chair Seymour, if you find the time, if we have time for that.
Any other questions? Great. Thanks. Yeah, well, we've got one registered comment here, and just in looking at it, we've got a visitor communication that is included a subject that is not part of what we're discussing here. I'm gonna strike that, but, because we've already had an opportunity to do that and there was no visitor communication at the time. So, if, Xenia, if you would like to come up and speak on, what we're talking about here with our briefing, we'd welcome you. If you could just, if you could come up to the podium and state.
I forgot them. Please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, my name is Enya Kuzma, 914 Horseback Trail. I'm a resident of Sisters. It's come a long way from the original Central Oregon Land Watch, 150 acres, to almost 300 acres. It's a very big chunk. And the mayor, a couple of months ago, actually a year ago, I think it was, said the North Plains was the only one doing a challenge to this referenda vote for urban growth boundary. And it was like a silly case. It's not a silly case. 72% of the residents of North Plains voted against the urban growth boundary proposed by the city. 72%. It won in court. Also, want to fact check this. Cities with populations under 10,000 are not required by state law to plan and apply for urban growth boundary expansions. I'd be happy to give you that law. Okay. They won the case for referenda vote, that residents can have a referenda vote, which has presented to you all as not possible. It was possible. They won, and their case will be heard Monday, August 12th, and it will apply to all cities in Oregon. Just wanted to give you some facts. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in our audience this evening that would like to speak?
I'm going to check for anyone over Zoom.
Okay.
For anyone, I see 2 attendees over Zoom. If you would like to provide testimony tonight, or not testimony, sorry, comments, would you please raise your hand? There's a button on Zoom that you can click, raised hand button, and if I see that pop up, I will give you permission to speak. Seeing none, I'm going to move on.
Okay. That'll conclude public comments for our workshop here. Anything else that we want to discuss, staff and commissioner comments?
No commissioner comments. I'll just offer a few.
Yep.
So we're starting to do more public engagement on the UGB, getting out into the community and kind of doing what we call our community conversations, which we did with the comprehensive plan and found it to be very effective. And so we've identified a bunch of different groups and boards in the community. There is certainly not a comprehensive list, and we're always open to recommendations for other ones. We threw that out to our steering committee as an opportunity for them to operate or facilitate one of these conversations. There's quite a few. There's like 3 pages full of community groups, almost 3 pages, that we would like to get on their agendas for their meetings and kind of do some education and hear their feedback. If there's any interest on the planning commissioner's part, if you are associated with the group that you work with, or say an HOA or something like that, and you want to do a presentation, we'll give you the meeting materials and enough information to be able to pull one off, and instructions on how you can record the public input you get that will make its way back to staff and to the consultant. So if you do have an interest in any of that, let me know. A board that you might want to take on, and we'll help you prepare for that so you can be successful. It helps. Well, staff is going to be doing a lot of these too, but it helps extend our reach out in the community if folks who are knowledgeable about the project would be interested in doing that. Rick, did you sign up for one already?
Not yet.
You're thinking about it, right?
Yes, I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
One thing too of note, all of the steering committee, UGB steering committee meetings are public access too. So, you guys can always come and join in. You might not be part of the committee, but you can, be educated more in this process.
And this goes out to the community too. If they can't make the meeting, you can watch the recordings of the meeting on this. You can find those on the city website under meetings agendas. You can find the packet, the agenda, and a link to the Zoom recording. So if you can't make it to the meeting, you can watch it later. Okay, staff, other staff comments up there in the peanut gallery? Okay,
All right, well, I think that'll do it.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate all the effort that went into the briefing tonight. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it. And we're adjourned.